unlike our normal procedures, when we've got a full group, including some rookies, we're only going to talk here about the changes that come into effect for 2020, with a little bit of review for some of them that came in actually in 2019 that are still fairly new to us. So let's get on with that. Okay, as we were alluding to earlier, we're going to have a question periods from time to time, more or less at the end of each general topic. If you use the chat function to tell the staff that you have a question, then we can deal with that during the question periods. Now this presentation is the Golf Canada presentation that's intended primarily for use with the experienced raters that would normally have come in for the Golf Canada workshop back a number of weeks that had to be canceled due to the COVID-19. So that I'm doing this not only to inform our volunteers of the changes, but it's kind of a trial run to test the presentation that we're going to be using in June for the course rating teachers from the various provincial associations. All right. So here's the agenda. As we normally do, we sort of divide things up into effective playing length corrections, EPL, and rating of obstacle factors. And we've added a little bit on here at the end regarding the interaction between the course rating and the World Handicap System, plus a little bit of other general information about the WHS and the new rules of handicapping that you may find helpful as you're entering your scores, your handicap. Okay. The guide, which will be issued to you in a few days, no longer has a range of dates on it. You'll notice it's simply effective January 2020. There's so much that's new with the WHS that the powers that be have decided that it's maybe not wise to put a definite end date on the course rating system guide, but just whenever need be, there would be an update. Okay. When you see it in a few moments, I quite like the new layout that they've got for the guide, in terms of putting where they put the tables, where they put the adjustments, and so on. It strikes me as being a little easier to use than the previous one, in terms particularly of making sure that you find the correct table for men or for women. The course rating manual will no longer be printed. It will still exist, but it will only be available for digital reading or digital download. And because of that, they have moved some of the decisions that used to be in the manual have been moved into the guide if they're ones that need to be referred to fairly frequently. Okay. Those of us with our tired old eyes will appreciate the fact that the font sizes have been increased. The Americans are going to have to get used to international spelling of words, which we're quite familiar with anyway. And I guess more significant than some of the others, there's additional guidance on where you would use +2 or +1 in some of the adjustments that that occur. Some of these definitions are not new, but serve as a reminder. Toggling back and forth. We've done this quite a bit on an ongoing basis. If we have trouble deciding whether a green should be rated relatively flat, gently sloped, or whether it's moderately contoured. The moderately sloped, that's kind of a cut and dried thing. You roll the ball down the stimp meter, and that's what you use. But I know we've had many situations in the past where we can't really decide between relatively flat or moderately contoured. And if that is the case on hole after hole, toggling means we would alternate moderately contoured one, flat the next, contoured the third, and so on. So again, this is just a bit of review of what we've been doing all along.
Sorry. What did you get?
Okay, mid-season, they've kind of expanded the definition of mid-season, and honestly, I'm not quite sure why. It used to be that we thought about rating a course as it was or would be in mid-season, and we were kind of thinking about, say, the month of July or and so on. But they're now, apparently at least, sort of saying that mid-season is all of golf season. So I'm not quite certain, quite frankly, why they did that. And for our purposes, I think what we will still continue to do when we're looking at long fescue, for example, we want to talk about what's that going to be like in July, as opposed to what it might be like in May, which is, less severe than it would be in July or August. Penalty area, again, this is just a reminder. The penalty area came in last time around. And probably in Saskatchewan, my experience suggests that it's more frequently that we're going to find areas of extreme rough being declared as penalty areas because the nature of the topography of Saskatchewan seems to be that we have more extreme rough than we do water hazards, but or what used to be called water hazards. Anyway, another point here, again, we started doing this before, but I'll remind you, it doesn't have to be marked. An area which is going to be treated as a penalty area does not have to be red staked. It does not have to be red border painted or anything like that. It is possible to declare penalty areas by description. Okay, waste area. Normally a waste area, as I'm familiar with it, is more what you'd think of as an unraked, unprepared bunker. This photo here certainly is a waste area. It's one which would be considered to be an area of extreme rough, at least a percentage weighted area of extreme rough, as we're going to see and have seen before. This is not a new slide. Okay, break for questions. All right, hearing none. Moving on then to the EPL corrections. This is what the roll table looked like up until this year, up until 2020. And what they've done is they've added at both the far left and the far right of the table, the downhill and the uphill side, a table value for extreme slope. And the purpose of this is to eliminate the need to have that separate E+1 or E-1 adjustment that we could put on or could have put on in previous years. So now we can just say, oh, it's extreme, take it right off the table. There or there, either downhill or uphill. Again, a reminder here, you don't evaluate roll where the shot is not a full shot, where the layup, that's already taken into consideration. So that E extreme adjustment didn't go away completely. They've made it into an F adjustment for firm or soft, where in addition to the slope of the area that you're evaluating for roll, it's either firmer than normal or softer than normal. And this adjustment would also be available if the landing zone is not in the fairway. If for some of the farther back tees, particularly for a bogey golfer, they may not be able to reach the fairway off the tee. And so we would have the opportunity to put this as a soft version of the adjustment. They have made the 2 times adjustment shot specific. So if you had a really long hole, you might have 2 subsequent full shots. Be pretty unlikely for scratch, but it would not at all be uncommon to find on a very long hole the bogey golfer falling into this situation. And something that we started to do with our last revision to the obstacle rating form, now they've taken it one step further, and dog leg and forced layup values will actually be separate entries into the course rating application. And the plus or minus 50 maximum is still applicable though, but we're already on our forms recording the dog leg adjustment and the forced layup adjustment in separate boxes. So that falls right in with what's been changed in the course rating application. That's now the way it gets entered into the system. They've put in a minimum for dog leg correction. Remember, up until now, even if a dog leg only cut off 5 yards, we put that in. Well, now they're saying don't bother unless the dog leg adjustment is 10 yards or greater. No such minimum for the forced layup, though. That still remains the actual number of yards, even if it's only, say, 4 or something like that. And the note here, if a dog leg bend is minor, you may not hit the shot just to the pivot point. You might be able to still go past the pivot point, and we should take that into consideration when we're rating the hole and assessing the dog leg adjustment. And this part here is there's no change involved here. It's just what we've always done for forced layups. Okay. When we were talking about wind last year and the time before, the table that the USGA used had values for both 9 holes and 18 holes. Well, turns out they didn't bother doing that in the application. They only have front 9 and back 9. There's no place you can enter a single 18-hole adjustment anyway. So they've revised it now, and it's just an automatic thing. Even if it's the same value, which quite often it will be, it has to be recorded as 2 9-hole adjustments anyway. And the usual disclaimer about where you can get the information for this. And again, the note that we get our values from Environment Canada's website in kilometers per hour, not in miles per hour. This has the same numbers as the kilometers per hour table that we were using last year and the year before. It just now shows only the 9-hole adjustments. And once again, this is something that we don't actually have to do for each and every course that we rate. I've already determined the average wind in golf season and daytime for a lot of the major centers in Saskatchewan, the ones that actually have hourly data that we can use in assessing the daylight hours. So only when we're rating a course that's not near any of the major centers, if it has hourly data, we might have to calculate the value for that particular area that we can use. This is something that is not entered in the field. This is entered by the team leaders when they enter things into the course rating application. But again, the numerical values here are the same as in the version of the table that is in your book from previous years. And we will incidentally be providing this table that you can tape into your new guide. But as I say, we don't actually do this evaluation. What we might do in the field is have a little bit of discussion. How wide open is this golf course to the wind? Should we be using the full value out of this table, or should we decide, well, no, we'll drop down 1 or 2 values because of the amount of protection from the wind that the trees surrounding this course might or might not have. Okay, another question break.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. 2 days, I think today is 2 days this week. We've had wind. I live on the GOGLEG golf course. There's no trees to speak of with regard to blocking wind. But the average wind was between 50 and 65 kilometers an hour for 12 hours both days in a row.
Yep.
And yesterday was a calm day. It was 25 kilometers an hour. So I'm wondering if there's some special adjustments that we should be looking at for the Regina courses, because the wind here is brutal. And I've played in tournaments here where the wind is 50, 60, 70 kilometers an hour. Yep. And there's no rating for that on the that I can see. No adjustments that have been taken for that. So
no, you're right. The table maxes out at 32 kilometers per hour, where for each 9 we have essentially an EPL adjustment of almost an additional 200 yards on each 9. But for days when the wind is even stronger than that, when we start talking about the World Handicap System, we'll deal with something that's called the playing conditions calculation. And that's something that will cut in when scores are posted on a day where the course is playing much more difficult than it was rated. So we'll come back to that issue towards the end of the presentation. But you're quite right, John. The table as provided only goes up to sustained winds of 32, and particularly gusts can be far higher than that in the plains, and we all that made a lifetime's worth of playing in South Saskatchewan conditions, we all know all about that, and it won't be taken into consideration any further than it is in the course rating, but there will be an adjustment for such particularly strong windy days when you play and your score is entered for your handicap. Any other questions?
Richard, it's Wendy. I have a question. What about a course like Thompson? The inside 4 holes are on the inside of the course, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all around the lake and more susceptible to wind.
Well, I think the appropriate thing there would be to take the table value for, the essentially unobstructed wind, and then you'd probably, it would probably make sense to go down in speed a couple or 3 so that you're entering more of an average than just the maximum
almost
value.
A tweener effect.
Yeah. Other questions?
If no one else has a question, just today is a calm day in Regina, and I've just checked the weather. I have a flag out in my backyard here, and today's a calm day. It's 33 to 48 kilometers an hour. That's a calm day.
Who said that was calm, John?
but that's an average day, and I'm just
yeah.
I think we should review some of these issues. Whether it makes any difference in the actual course rating at the end, I don't know. But it seems to me that when you've got in Regina, the average is probably 30 to 40 kilometers. That's the average.
Well, no, actually it isn't. And the average that we use for Regina is, I think, about 19 kilometers per hour sustained wind. And that has been obtained from taking a couple of actual years worth of raw data from Environment Canada.
I garden and I keep track of, I enter every day what the temperature is and the wind. And this year, I didn't do it last year, but this year, the average has been over 30 kilometers an hour. And so I don't know what Environment Canada does, but when there's no trees here.
Well, essentially, the airport measures it.
And it's windier at the airport.
Lost your audio there, John.
Oh, I'm fine. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. Any other questions on the EPL?
Richard, just with the effective playing length, can that be taken into account to make a short course into one that could have a course and slope rating if it's in and amongst, and again, a couple of ones, Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, for instance, can that be taken into account?
The short answer
give them
is no.
Both the course and slope rating?
The short answer is no. The determination of short course versus regular course is on the yardage before considering any EPL adjustments. Okay, anything further? Let's move on to obstacle rating. Here's something that we should all be familiar with. It's now official. There is a column for topography between minor and moderately awkward, something that we had in our tweener tables, and we called it somewhat awkward. I actually like their wording better because now we can use a 2-letter abbreviation in our notes without duplication that we were going to have between somewhat and extremely. So now we can, in taking our notes, we can say MP, MM, MA, SA, and EA, and there will be no overlap or to deal with. So again, all this means is that we don't have to have a tweener table for this. They have now put the column in the guide itself. There have been some changes to the fairway table. There's now just a single table. It uses the fairway width ranges from the previous women's table, but still retains the separate hole lengths for men and women. Also note here, the fairway is less than 20 yards wide. Adding another one with a W+1 should not be done. You know, if it's less than 20 yards, that's as, you know, that essentially goes all the way down to 0. So there's no W+1 if your table values are in this column already. They also removed the use of the obstruct, the O adjustment for fairway, and it can still be achieved if it's a width, by using the width adjustment to essentially reduce the width of the fairway by the amount that the obstruction is blocking. Okay, so a fairway width could be reduced by a dog leg, overhanging branches, contour tilt, severe obstacles on one side, and then to get to a W+2 is where the majority of the fairway landing zone is tilted and balls are quite likely to end up not staying on the fairway at all. W-1 if there's something like the bank shown in this photo that would cause balls that were going to otherwise miss the fairway to bounce back on. We've seen that go on an ongoing basis. A bit of clarification on using the W- adjustment for those situations where there's a narrow landing zone and shots can be hit from the rough as easily as from the fairway. This is something that normally we deal with only when we're evaluating a landing zone that's getting pretty close to the green. And it could have been in the past W-1 or W-2. Well, the clarification here is if from the one side, either the left or right, you would be able to hit a shot to the green, normally a little pitch shot or is what you'd be talking about. But if the same thing is true on both sides, then you could use a W-2. Well, what determines whether you can use both sides or one side? Well, usually it would be if there's something adjacent to that narrowed fairway, like a bunker, that means you're not going to be able to hit the shot as easily as from the fairway. That would restrict you to W-1, not W-2. And if there were bunkers to both sides, you wouldn't put W-1 or 2, because anything that misses that narrow fairway would not, you know, you'd not be having a shot from the rough. It would be a shot from the bunker or whatever else was causing the fairway to be extremely narrow. So a little bit of clarification there that they want us to be aware of. Okay, These are the green target tables from the previous book. And a couple of things to note here. Now, the ones that we've taped into our books have the widths or the diameters of the green going from smallest to largest, which is the opposite of what the USGA has always had. But in particular, just notice here, we have in the old ones 7 columns. Here's the new one. They still have what I consider the columns in a counterintuitive backwards row, but they're now only 6 columns, and the ranges of yardages for the diameter are more uniform. Again, there's the old, there's the new, and there's the point that they removed column 7, and greater than 31 yards effective diameter is now in the column 6 there. Okay. Transition zone, they've simplified our treatment of the transition zones a little bit. Firstly, a bit of review is why we have a transition zone. And the fact that they have added a row in the green target table for the transition, 50-50. If you figure it's a 50-50 chance that that the player will get to the center of the green. And we can go plus or minus 1 if we figure that it's not 50-50, but off in one way or another. If it's a little bit more likely that you're going to get there, you would use a higher rating because getting there from a longer distance. If it's less, you'd go down to a 1 point less effective or less transition value if you're going to be using the short shot more often. Okay, and don't forget that EPL should be considered before deciding whether you have a transition zone or not. And to simplify things a little bit as far as rating the other obstacles, this is the new part here. They're saying now when the player is expected to reach the center of the green at least 50% of the time, only use the long shot, the shot that reaches the center of the green, for an evaluation of the obstacles near the green. Use the transition value for the green target. We don't worry about evaluating the short shot in those situations. On the other hand, if we conclude that the player will reach the center of the green less than 50% of the time, then we forget about the long shot and we just arbitrarily take a landing zone 10 yards in front of the green. We don't have to worry about, is it 10, is it 15, is it 5? Just, if you're not going to get there 50% of the time, take a landing zone 10 yards in front of the green and use that to evaluate such obstacles as, well, not so much bunkers, but such things as penalty areas, for example. So this just, speeds up the treatment of the transition area in terms of what we calculate and put in our form. So here you see there would be a transition zone if it's less than 50%. I don't think this is to scale. That looks like more than 10 yards to me, but you get the idea that we wouldn't, if this bogey golfer gets to the center of the green 50% or more of that we're using the 50-50 transition, then we don't even bother doing this one at all. Okay. They're splitting out the unpleasant adjustment. It used to be that was used not only for areas of hard pan, but also for areas where there's closely mown areas, fondly known or not so fondly known, I guess, depending on whether you go in them, as a collection areas for shots that miss the green and roll down to the bottom of a hill and pose quite a challenge to recover from. So that part has been taken out of unpleasant, even though it is an unpleasant situation, believe me, and is now put in the inconsistent, the I+1 adjustment. So we still recognize those excuse me, collection areas. It's just that instead of using a U+1, we use an I+1 to record them. Okay. Mounds and rise and drop previously have been their, separate adjustments. So now what they're saying is we're going to no longer have the rise and drop as a separate adjustment. It will be included in the mound adjustment, or in other words, if you have those rise and drop situations, we don't put it down with an R adjustment, we put it down as the part of an M adjustment. So it's not that it's something that we haven't rated before or not going to rate in the future. Neither of those is the case. It's just a matter of where we recognize it. The M+2 here on the single shot is the new usage, which corresponds to the old rise and drop greater than 10 feet. Okay, with regard to the surround adjustment in R&R, we still have the S+1 if we've had a lateral obstacle with a surround adjustment of 2, but we don't have the S+2 adjustment here in R&R that we used to have when there was a surround adjustment of +3 in the lateral obstacle. The reason we don't have it here is that it no longer exists in the lateral obstacle adjustments. They took the +3 out. They've modified the squeeze adjustment wording, which used to be 10 or 15 yards from the center to both sides. They now just talk about the squeeze in reference to the total distance between the bunkers. Well, I mean, that certainly is the same result there. 15 to either side for 30, or 10 to either side for 20 in between. This just handles it a little better for situations where the distance is not the same from center to either side. We don't care about that now. We just look at the distance between the bunkers. So there, for example. A little bit of a change, clarification with regard to the bunker carry adjustment. They now talk about a significant portion of the green instead of the usual more than half of the green. So the reason they've done that is in recognition of the fact that a bunker blocking a certain fraction of the green is going to be more important if that's more or less in the middle, where it's going to be blocking access to more pin positions, than if you had a bunker out to the side, which was also still blocking the same percentage of the full width of the green, but not blocking from as many possible tee times. Whoops. So in this one, for example, if that's the width and there's our bunker, it looks like it's close to being centered on the width of that green. So we might say, well, that we're going to give a carry adjustment to that, even if it's a little bit less than half, because of its position, making it significant to more pin positions than if this bunker was all over here instead of where it is. Okay, the extreme, we've had that before. And again, nothing new here. This is just a reminder. E+2 for a fairway bunker, if the nature of it restricts the option that you have to either playing out sideways or backwards, or taking the penalty adjustment that's now possible to drop outside a bunker under the revised rules of golf. In any of those cases where you cannot advance the ball any significant distance and have to go out sideways, backwards, or take a penalty, that would warrant an E+2. They've gone back to what we used to do for measuring the bunker depth. They are now talking about not just getting on any part of the green, which they had moved to, as you'll recall, for the past couple of years. They now say, no, that's not severe enough. We have to be measuring the depth that you'd have to achieve to get to the area of the green where most of the holes are located. So for a while there, we said, well, as long as you can get over here, that would be enough. But now, no, if the majority of the holes are back here, which they certainly would appear to be, then this is where you measure the height or the depth, the height of the shot that you need to get over that and onto the part of the green that has the majority of the hole locations. Kind of gone back to the way it was before, more or less. And I think that probably makes sense. Okay, the crossing obstacles. This came in with the 2019 revisions. Nothing new here. But they did add to the crossing obstacles a C+1, a carry +1 Similar idea to having the bunker carry, so that if a crossing obstacle closely borders the front of the green, remember, closely bordering the green is means within 10 yards. So we would then, in a situation in this picture here, we would add a C+1 adjustment, assuming that this distance here was 10 yards or less. So it's there to reflect the fact that this particular shot across the obstacle is more challenging than it might be if there was more room beyond the obstacle. You have to play it really cagey to not go too far on a situation like this. And they're suggesting that the percentage adjustment should be applied on crossing of obstacles where appropriate. In this particular photo, here you've got areas of extreme rough in here, but areas where if the ball ends up, you can probably play the shot. So using less than full table value would probably be appropriate in evaluating this crossing. Okay. They're also suggesting throughout, in both carrying and lateral evaluation of extreme rough, areas of extreme rough or penalty areas, that we keep it simple and go with adjustment values 25, 50, 75, 100%, just to simplify things. Pick the closest to one of those values. Okay, lateral obstacles. Still room in here and in here for tweeners. And again, of course, the USGA has never moved off its habit of having the ranges in what, again, mathematically unintuitive listing, but we'll say a little bit more about that. Okay, again, nothing new in terms of the definitions and obstacle squeeze, when lateral obstacles are present on both sides of a landing zone and a player cannot play away from either side. Only happens in fairway landing zones. And a Q+1 where the distance is less than 40, a Q+2 where the distance between is less than 30. And something that is new, well, relatively new, the squeeze at one time was only applicable if you had the same type of obstacle on both sides. For example, lateral water hazard or extreme rough. Now this photo shows extreme rough on both sides, but it is now possible to evaluate the squeeze and use the squeeze adjustment, considering that these are both penalty areas, so it doesn't matter if one is water and the other is extreme rough. We can how we can have an obstacle squeeze, which at one time we were not able to do. Here's that same picture again. They continue to to stress using the percentage of the table value when evaluating lateral obstacles, if it's possible to hit shots from the area in some places and not from others. Okay, here's the revised surround table. The +3 is no longer there. We just have 0 and +1 if it's a quarter to a half surround, and +1 and +2 if it's greater than 1/2 surrounded. And that refers back to the R&R. This value here would require the S+1 back in R&R. Okay. It's now official. The bounce -1, sorry, applied to obstacles behind the green. We used to just say it's behind the green, let's subtract 1. Well, now we actually assign it with the bounce adjustment letter. And you could, depending on what the obstacle's like, you could have a percentage adjustment there as well. The jeopardy adjustment for playing away from trouble has been removed because there was really no consistency in how and when it was being used. And they've clarified that we would not use the K for stroke and distance, the K+1 adjustment, if the rating value is 1. If it's only going to get a 1, they say that's not sufficient, that we want it to become a 2 just because it's subject to the stroke and distance penalty. It's not declared a lateral hazard or lateral obstacle. And I don't know why they have this picture, because I don't really see this picture particularly being relevant to these obstacles that they were just talking about. But okay, the chute adjustment for trees. They decided to actually call it a chute in terms of the code for the adjustment, as opposed to using the Q, the squeeze letter. And eliminated the second part of the adjustment when trees are on both sides, because they're already on both sides for there to be a chute. Okay. Eliminated the O+2 adjustment, but made the O+1 shot specific, so it could potentially happen on more than once on a hole. Like on this hole here, where you've got what would be considered eligible for chute treatment going on for a long way down there. Okay, table starts at 8 yards. They realized that a 2-yard width that you had to hit from between the hit through was a little bit shall we say unusual. Okay, so it works the same way. find the width of the chute at its narrowest point, distance to that narrowest point. That locates you in the table, and then you go down to the bottom to get the adjustments. Use of the tiered definition. This has also been changed to just using significant instead of at least 50%. Same idea as they've removed it from the bunker carry. Well, here it's the proportion that has the ramp. Oops. Oh, and one other thing, it's not on the slide here, but it was on one of the holes that we evaluated at the USGA's calibration workshop in San Diego in January. They had a green there that had 3 plateaus, so 2 ramps between. Neither of the ramps between, or the distance or in height between the 2 adjacent levels, none of that was greater than 2 feet, but cumulative from the lowest level to the highest level, it was more than 2 feet. And the ruling was that would be considered tiered if you can compare the lowest to the highest, even though there was another intermediate level in between. It is still appropriate to call that a tiered green. So I don't know how often we're going to see that, but it does come up, and we should just remember if we do encounter it that it can still be a tier if the difference in height from lowest to highest is more than 2. Okay, they did some tweaking of the site adjustment. Now we don't actually do that since the program does it directly from the data, so we won't spend a lot of time on that here, I should say. And this is just a summary of where there were changes, additions, and so on. And you'll see when you get your new guides that this section 11 is actually a page in the table that you can refer to just to see where there have been changes made. Okay, question time. No questions? Okay. So now we'll branch into something that isn't strictly speaking course rating. It's the interaction between, if you like, the course rating and the, oops, touched that too soon, and the World Handicap System. Just sort of as a beginning point, the course rating system is now considered to be part of the World Handicap System. Some key principles and key elements of the World Handicap System: fewer scores required to obtain a handicap, a higher maximum handicap, a change in the maximum hole score to what's called net double bogey, and some changes to what are acceptable scores for handicap purposes. Abnormal course and weather conditions adjustment. I alluded to this one when I was answering John's question earlier. calculation based on ability with memory, and we'll see what that means. Playing handicap, course slope rating, and par. And that's maybe the one that people are going to be questioning the most, just because they don't understand why things have changed. Daily revisions, well, we've always had that, but some countries didn't. USGA was biweekly revisions to one handicap. Integration of 9-hole scores, well, we've had that. Accommodating local cultures, I suppose that too. Okay, par has more of a role now. Okay. Looking here, we see things that we shouldn't as course raters like. If we're talking about men playing this, we're fine back here, the black, blue, and whites, but the gold and the red are pretty short to be considered a par 5 for men. Used to be, we had pretty defined cutoffs between par 3s and 4s and 4s and 5s. Now, there's going to be a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of overlap that we can consider. We can now, if necessary, consider a par 3 up to 260 yards. Probably there'd be some reason. We used to cut that off at 250, but we can also have a par 4 starting as little as 240 yards and going to 490, which is 20 yards past where par 4s used to end for men, and so on. The ranges overlap now, and in addition to the yardage and the effective playing length considerations, we also are told in evaluating par to consider how the hole was designed to be played. So if the approach to a green is difficult because of bunkers on the front left and front right, that's an indication that the designer of the hole is probably expecting high trajectory, short distance shots to get over those bunkers and onto the putting surface. So in other words, from the back tee, the designer said, okay, you'll hit your tee shot, you'll hit your full second shot, and then you might have a wedge or an 8-iron or something like that to get over the bunker. So the hole was designed to be a 3-shot hole. Now, from a shorter, more forward tee on that same hole, you might get where the scratch golfer would be within distance of getting on into, but is probably not going to choose to try that or succeed very often because of there being little room to roll the ball onto the green. The hole wasn't designed for the ball to be rolled onto the green. So that would be one of the places where we would be justified considering it to be a par 5, even though by raw yardage maybe it isn't. But the hole was designed for that kind of shot, a short, high trajectory third shot. Okay. So the idea here is that when you have a a course that has multiple sets of tees, we would like to find a way of having the tees, or the par, I should say, not change from tee to tee, if that makes sense. Now, there are going to be some where from a very forward tee, you just have no rationale for leaving a hole as a par 5. And in that case, it's going to have to be called a par 4. But they did provide us with a little more flexibility in doing the evaluation of par for a hole. And because of some of the factors involved in the World Handicap System, it's quite important that we do that we do give some thought to the appropriate par values for holes when played from the more forward tees. Okay, one reason is that you now use net double bogey in the World Handicap System to figure out what your maximum hole score is. And net double bogey is par plus 2, there's the double bogey, and net plus any handicap stroke or strokes that the player receives on that hole. The asterisk means, or the player gives back on that hole if he or she is a plus handicap. So that's what net double bogey means, and it's now what your maximum hole score is when you're determining your score for handicap purposes.
Richard?
So of course it's important to have the right par. Okay.
Yeah, Richard?
Yeah.
Sorry, but just while we're on this, then how is the handicap stroke holes?
Well,
how are they determined?
We will get there.
Okay.
Okay. So what is your course handicap? And as I mentioned earlier, this is one that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows just because of the way the way it looks more so than the way it works. All along, one's course handicap for years and years and years represents the number of strokes you would need to achieve as a net score the course rating of the tees being played. Now, that means that when you have a more forward set of tees, it has, of course, a lower course rating. So it's quite possible that your course handicap will be the same there as it would be on a higher or longer set of tees where you're playing to a higher course rating. Unfortunately, a lot of golfers never realized that and always thought that if you played to your handicap, you were going to get a par, a net par. Well, no, that was not the case. Well, it was always your course handicap, your handicap index. We're back to using index since everybody's using it now, no longer the handicap factor, but the same number, is the slope rating of the tee set divided by 113. And that meant that if you shot your handicap, your net score would be the course handicap. Or sorry, would be the course rating. Now it is back or reset to being what most people thought it was all along. The number of strokes needed to play down as the net score to par on the tees being played. So course handicap now is the handicap index times the slope rating divided by 113. That hasn't changed, plus the difference between course rating and par. Now let's think about that for a moment. with an example. Okay, here's a situation where you have green tees. The rating is 72, white at 70.0, and silver at 68.0. All of those are par 70, and the slopes are 128, 125, 119 as shown there. So the course handicap for someone with a 15 handicap index, turns out it would be 17 for the green and white and 16 for the silver. I see we have somebody called Dusty. I suspect somebody's trying to Zoom bomb us. So, anyway, and of course, it would now be in 2020, 19, 17, and 14. Why? Why does it go up for the green tees and down for the silver tees? Well, because of the difference between course rating and par. If you're adding the difference between a course rating of 72 and a par of 70, that means you're adding 2, which brings that course handicap up to 19. But if you're playing from the silver with a course rating of 68 and a par of 70, the course rating minus par is -2, so that would reduce the course handicap. So a lot of seniors are going to be questioning what's happened here. They're going to say, why is my handicap gone down? Well, because you play from a set of tees where the course rating is less than par, and that will reduce your course handicap from what it was before. But your target score doesn't change. The target score here, if you're for that 16 at the course rating 68 was 84. Course handicap of 14 plus par of 70, still 84. And your senior members will feel much better when, when they notice that everybody playing from that same set of tees, their course handicaps are going up or down the same way, because the difference is the same. So if all of your senior men were playing here and all of them notice that their course handicap goes down by 2, well, that's because they're playing on a set of tees where the difference between course rating and par is -2. So relative to one another, there's no change. So if they're playing matches, there's going to be no difference in who gets how many strokes. The only thing is, if it's a net score in stroke play, the number that you're shooting for is now the par and not the course handicap. But again, the difference is still going to be based on just one thing, the difference between course rating and par. Now, similarly, the players, the longer hitters playing from the green here, their course handicap will go up, but everybody's will go up by 2. So the important part, the difference between them, if they're having a match, for example, that remains unchanged. Oh, I should mention, for tournaments and other events, there's also what's called your playing handicap, and that is different from your course handicap if an event says, well, we're only going to use 80% of your handicaps in this event, then of course your handicap would be reduced by 80%, or to 80%, I should say, as a condition of competition, and then that would be your playing handicap for that event. But for normal general play, it's your course handicap that you would be talking about, and it is your course handicap that is used in determining your net double bogey score, not any playing handicap that you might be playing to in an event. Okay, the playing condition calculation, or PCC for short. What happens here is that on every day, the score differentials that are posted are mathematically compared with what statistics say should be the average or the normal range of differentials. And if over the course of that day, at least 8 acceptable scores are posted, and they are from golfers with handicap index of 36.0 or below, it may be that the calculation suggests that the course was playing from that set of tees, so it was playing, say, 2 strokes more difficult than it would be statistically expected to be. The PCC value then calculated would have been a +2, and that would be applied by the score center to all score differentials for that course and that day. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Just to, this is one of the reasons why with the World Handicap System, it's important to try to get your scores posted before midnight of the day you play. The reason? Well, only scores posted before midnight local time are used to calculate what this PCC should be for that day. Now, other scores that are posted later, the PCC from that day will still be applied to them, but their score would not have been used in determining what the PCC value would be. Okay, so try to get your scores posted the day you play them if you can. That way, it encourages the calculation of the PCC. The other thing that sort of spins off of this is that no longer will your handicap update right as you post the score, because it has to be kept till the end of the day and it might be subject to adjustment. So that's why if you've entered your score on the day of play, you will not see necessarily that have any effect until the morning of the following day. Okay, the exceptional score reduction, or ESR, this will happen again automatically if a player submits a score differential 7.0 strokes or more better than their handicap index. This is essentially designed to replace the reduced handicap from exceptional tournament scores. The difference now, it happens with any and all scores. Okay. So when an exceptional score is posted to the player's scoring record, the handicap index will be reduced in accordance with the following adjustment table. If it's 7.0 to 9.9 below the handicap index, the reduction is 1.0. If it's 10.0 or more, better than the handicap index, the exceptional score reduction is -2. Okay, it only takes one exceptional score to trigger this. But if there are more, the results or the adjustments or reductions are applied cumulatively. Okay, and the way it works is that to make sure that the impact continues, the reduction is applied to the previous 19 score differentials in your scoring record as well. So then the adjustment or reduction will gradually be diluted as you post more new scores that are not exceptional, and you push out the adjusted scores off the bottom of your scoring record. Okay, now the stroke hole allocation. In the past, stroke hole allocation has been based on consideration of the relative difficulty of a hole for bogey golfers versus scratch golfers. The greater that distance, the earlier that hole gets it allocated. The number one handicap hole, contrary to popular belief, was never necessarily the most difficult course hole on the course. It was the hole that bogeys found much more difficult compared to scratch than some of the others. So as a recommendation, they're taking a new approach on this. And one of the reasons is that with that strict mathematical approach, often in a match play, the match might be over before a player got the advantage of a stroke that the opponent was having to give him or her. So what they're suggesting here, and it is a recommendation as opposed to a rule, courses that have used scorecard analysis and mathematically to do their stroke allocations are perfectly able to continue to use those. But for those that haven't, this is a suggested method, is to group the allocations into groups of 3 called triads. So on the front 9, holes 1, 2, and 3 would be a part of a triad, 4, 5, 6, another one, and so on. So something here, for example, that would be the middle triad on the front 9, and they suggest that if it makes sense that the number 1 allocated stroke hole be a hole in the middle triad. It doesn't have to be number 5, but it would be best if it's one of 4, 5, or 6. And then similarly, the back 9, you'd have your number 2 hole. And by the way, I don't like the numbers they put in this table. It almost looks like they're doing front and back or play on a 9-hole course, because here's the 11, there's the 12, there's the 13, there's the 14. That would be highly unlikely in my opinion. Now, you might well have the number 2 hole in the middle triad of the back 9, but these surrounding ones are not necessarily going to be numbers 12 and 14, although they could be. Okay, questions there?
So that's where my question comes in. How do you determine the stroke holes? You group them into triads.
Yeah, and the USGA course rating application now allows for and provides for this information. There's a tab in there that can be used to have a look at what the math suggests. I haven't shown here anywhere near the math that goes into this allocation,
Yeah.
because that's more for handicap chairs and so on to understand. But in any case, one way or the other, if you want this information, we can provide it for you from the USGA application.
I have a question, Richard.
Yep.
Can you explain again the net double bogey? For example, let's say I do a double bogey on a hole, but it's also a stroke hole for me on my handicap. So how would I enter that?
Well, let's say it's a par 4. Okay, because it double bogey, we have to take par into consideration. So if you take a double bogey on that par 4, your score is 6. Your maximum would be, assuming you only get 1 stroke on that hole, your maximum that you could post would be 7. Now, in the example where you only make the double bogey, that's a true double bogey, not a net double bogey. So your score of 6 is what you post, and you have not reached your maximum allowable score.
So that means if I had a triple bogey, I'd have to post the triple on that one. But if I had a triple bogey on a hole, I get 0 strokes, I just post a double?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions there then? Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, so will any organization provide that information, such as Golf Saskatchewan? I'm asking because I'm part of a group.
Oh, yeah.
And it includes.
This will be made available essentially to all of the provincial golf associations in Canada.
And just in Canada, I would assume that
yeah,
the
this
USGA and the Scotland, the Royal.
Well, yeah, this presentation was based on the USGA's presentation that they showed us at the calibration sessions, with the WHS stuff added. Now, in the States and in Canada, there will be certainly there will be fuller and more depth presentations on the WHS itself. This one is the course rating PowerPoint,
yeah,
with a little bit of information about the WHS added, so that you can see how important par now becomes, for example. But the one that will be available on the Golf Canada website, and I guess Brian we'll maybe put it up on ours as well, will be one that focuses in much more detail, and goes into much more detail on the WHS itself.
Okay, so they will expect to get, when they take their handicap system programming,
yes,
they would expect to get that information.
Yeah, and then that is nearing readiness to be available. There's kind of 2 versions. One we might call the club level presentation, and then the more advanced one that's intended for certification for handicap purposes.
Okay.
Those are both nearing completion and should be available shortly.
Thank you.
Question, Richard.
Yep.
Wayne here. Just wondering, are you going to send this copy of the slideshow presentation to each of the course raters then?
You'll be able to access it on the Golf Saskatchewan. What is the? I know we have a YouTube channel somewhere that Brian is going to put it on, so you'll be able to download it from YouTube.
Okay. Because I was just thinking of me reading, you know, I just want to read through it and not necessarily have all of the, you know, the voiceovers and stuff like that.
So Wayne, what I will ask Richard, and to make sure that his committee is okay with this, I can change it into a PDF version from the slideshow that Richard is using and send that around, provided that, again, it's not circulated outside of the course rating group. I'm sure that there wouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to check that with Golf Canada first, but I don't see that there would be a problem. I mean, it's information we want all of our course raters to become familiar with. So, okay, any other questions or thoughts? Or okay, I want to turn now to a couple of other points. One is with respect to the tables. I've pointed out along the line that the tables that are printed in the guides are still in the USGA's column order. We can go ahead and make tables that you can tape over that will have the columns in the lowest to highest order if you think it's worth doing. Or we can just go back to using the columns in the what I consider the backwards order that they're as printed. What is everybody's thoughts on that? Do you prefer the ones the order we've been using for the last several years, or are you okay with us just using the ones in the USA order? There's fewer tweeners to consider, which is why it was getting the tweeners to look right was the main reason for changing the order in the first place. But we can just leave it the way it is now and work with it, or we can make overlaying tables in the way that we've done in the past number of years. And
Richard,
maybe rather than try to get a survey, that if you all want to just email me or with would you like them the way they are in this presentation, or would you like them to be reordered and we can sort of keep score that way?
I think we're better continuing with what we're used to, personally.
Well, I'm okay with that.
Fewer mistakes.
That was one of the things we think we achieved with the revised order. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to make the tables.
Okay, Richard, Wayne here again.
Yeah.
If possible, like when we had our last workshop in Saskatoon, Brian had prepped up the ones that were pre-taped, and we could put those in. Could those be done and put into the books in advance?
Well, that's one reason, Wayne, why we didn't send out the books before this this webinar, because we didn't know whether we were going to put new tables in or not. Brian, do we have any interns?
No interns yet.
No. Will we be getting some?
Yeah, it depends as to what phase 3 and 4 might look like.
Okay. Well, let's leave that point for just a moment and get to the third point, which is given the COVID-19 situation and the need for physical distancing and so on. In talking to Brian, he and I, and I talking to the National Committee, which has been surveying all the provinces, it seems that we should not really plan on doing any course ratings this spring. There's just still too much potential risk. You know, would we have, for example, would we have to have everybody drive to a course in their own vehicle? Because otherwise, if we don't, we're violating the 2 meter parameter. You know, with courses having to have only one rider in each cart, are they going to have carts for us to use? You know, just a variety of reasons, and really, we think that for safety's sake, we should probably not attempt to do anything this spring, and we will reevaluate and maybe do a few in the fall if the COVID-19 situation has improved sufficiently. So that means we have time as far as getting you the books. So if we're hoping to get an intern or two into the Golf Saskatchewan office as we move along in the phases, that might provide somewhere and someone who could do the taping.
John here. I'm good with waiting until it's safe to do so.
Bob here. I feel the same. And just to let you know, Richard, any teams that I have led on any courses we've done, we've always asked for 1 cart for each rater. And
some of us like to do it in pairs, but anyway, my point really was one that the courses have fewer carts available functionally. They have the same number of carts, but they're using them twice as often for a foursome.
Now they are, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I say I think it's the safe thing to do, and I think with that being said, I think it's the right thing to do, and incidentally, I think that sentiment is being shared by a number of other provinces as well. So I think we'll leave it at that then. Hopefully we'll be able to hire some interns, if we can, particularly if we can qualify for some of the wage subsidies that are available. And then maybe that could get the tables pasted into the books before they're sent out to you.
Richard, once they're passed along, I'll make sure that they do that. And for anyone who's in and around the Saskatoon area, I can make 1 or 2 days potentially available where somebody can slide by the office and pick them up. So not a huge deal. And then for those that want to cut and paste under their own accord, if they wanted to let me know via email, and we can maybe get them out, and if they want to do it themselves. So
yeah, well,
either way, once you provide us.
Yeah, I was gonna say the first thing I got to do is make the tables. Yeah.
I get up to Saskatoon on occasion. Probably haven't been there for a while, but we'll be there likely late June or early July. So if the books are ready, let me know, Brian, and I can bring those back for the Regina folks. And
Okay.
White City.
All right. Any other questions, comments? If not, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this webinar, and well, we hope we'll all get together in the field again whenever it's safe to do so.